Okay, well, my name is Claudia Sobral, and I'm the project manager of the Transpacific Borderlands, the art of the Japanese diaspora in Mexico City, Lima, Sao Paulo, and Los Angeles. This exhibition is a result of research and work of many curators and artists at each one of these cities. How many of you have seen the exhibition? Okay, most of you. That's great. The ones who didn't see it, you still have an opportunity today. The museum closes at 5, and we should be done with our program around 4, so you have time to come and see the exhibition. Central to this exhibition were questions and themes related to identity, hybridity, cosmopolitanism, and homeland. And how do each of these artists deal with the complexities of these themes in their work? So today's program is in conjunction with this exhibition and is also a part of the Pacific Standard Time Los Angeles Latin America initiative of the Getty Foundation, designing to actually look at Latin America and Latino arts in conversation with Los Angeles. We are very grateful to the Getty Foundation and to the opportunity to participate in this program, in this exhibition, which is actually more than an exhibit, was really a research project with scholars and, as I said, curators and artists involved from the inception, from the development of the project and its publication. So it was a very collaborative process from its inception. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank museum members for their ongoing support of the museum's programs, and also acknowledge here with us Rick Noguchi, the museum's COO. And a very, very special thanks to Elizabeth Lin, who is the public programs manager, for organizing today's programs and several of the Transpacific Borderlands programs. So the conversation this afternoon will focus on social representation and cultural context. How do borderlands function as a space for exchanging ideas and culture? How do artworks take on new cultural and historical meanings when displayed to a new audience? And what is the role of the artist and his or her practice? So before I introduce the panelists, a few housekeeping announcements. Please turn off your cell phones. And no eating or drinking. You can drink, bottled water is fine. But emergency exits are on the top behind you. There are 2 exits, and bathroom and restrooms are also upstairs. The catalog of the exhibition will be available for sale after the program. And now it's really my pleasure to introduce the panelists today, because I actually know them well, and I have had the pleasure of working with Clement Hanami for many years. I'm back at the museum now for this project, but I have been working with the museum since 1995, so many, many years. So it's really wonderful to be able to introduce each of them. And Shinpei Takeda is one of the artists in the exhibition. Personally, I have been a great admirer of his work and have just witnessed the kinds of meaningful and interesting conversations that his work triggered on school groups that come to visit the museum. So it's really wonderful to have him here today to contribute his perspective. And then Selene Preciado, who's also, who has been instrumental to the Getty's Pacific Standard Time Los Angeles Latin America initiative, and has been very much involved and helping us and guiding us with this process. So I'll begin with Selene Preciado, who's going to be moderating the conversation today. Selene is a Los Angeles-based independent curator and works as a program assistant at the Getty Foundation since 2015. Previously, she worked as a curatorial research assistant at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles and assistant curator at the Museum of Latin American Art. Preciado obtained a BA in Visual Arts from the University of California, San Diego, and holds an MA in Art and Curatorial Practices in the Public Sphere from the University of Southern California. She is currently working on an exhibition project with the Smithsonian Latino Center on the work of the La Torre brothers, to open in 2020. Recent curatorial projects include Customizing Language, the inaugural exhibition of the Emerging Curators Programs at LACE, co-curated with Idure Alonso, and Jose Montoya's Abundant Harvest, Works on Paper, Works on Life, Fowler Museum at UCLA, co-curated with Richard Montoya in 2016. So welcome, Selene. Thanks for being here. Shinpei Takeda. The question is always, where in the world is Shinpei Takeda? And you would understand why, because Shinpei was born in Osaka, Japan. He lives and works in Tijuana, Mexico, and Dusseldorf, Germany. Shinpei Takeda is a visual artist and a filmmaker. His works involve a wide range of themes regarding memories and history. He uses multimedia installations, sound interventions, documentary films, and large-scale photography installations, and collaborative community projects in various public contexts. Shinpei is also a founder and creative director of the AJA Project, a nonprofit dedicated to working with resettled refugee children in San Diego, and displaced youth in Colombia and Thailand using a participatory photography. As a documentary filmmaker, he works on films with diverse topics, including pre-World War II Japanese immigration to Tijuana, Mexico, and the atomic bomb survivors living in the Americas. As an artist, he creates site-specific installations, interventions such as an outdoor urban photo montage in collaboration with the community, or visual installations on the floor of a gallery. As a performance artist, he directs Ghost Magnet Roach Motel, a noise performance unit from Tijuana, Mexico. Thanks, Shinpei, for being here. Okay. Now,
I can just go up.
yeah, okay, but I have to say a few words. Okay. Clement Hanami is exhibitions director at the Japanese American National Museum and one of the curators of Transpacific Borderlands exhibition. It is Clement Hanami's vision that brings to the museum projects like Transpacific Borderlands. So the vision of connecting the work of the museum and the experience of the Japanese Americans to the larger LA community, and now with this project, it really enabled us to extend that to an international community. He also teaches new genres at the Los Angeles County High School of the Arts. He received his bachelor's and master's degree in fine arts from the University of California, Los Angeles, and has exhibited his thematic installations and multimedia work since 1986 in such venues as the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Craft and Folk Art Museum, and the Municipal Art Gallery. Clement Hanami served as a Cultural Affairs Commissioner for the city of Culver City. In 2010, he completed his first public art piece, Through the Looking Glass, or Traveling at the Speed of Light rail for Metro Gold Line East Side Extension. In 2016, his work was featured in the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center exhibition, Cross Lines, a cultural lab on intersectionality. Thank you.
I had to wait until the light turned green. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And I wanted to open up with a sort of question. The first part is for Clement, and the second part is for both of you. With this idea of the borderlands as the conceptual framework of the exhibition, how did you and the other curators that were part of the team come up with this framework for the show? And just wanted to bring up the idea of Borderlands, or the Borderlands theory from Gloria Anzaldua's, which is for the Chicano experience, but I think it applies also to the framework of the show, as this theory of Borderlands refers to the geographical area that is most susceptible to hybridity, neither fully of one side nor the other. And she used this term to identify a growing population that cannot distinguish invisible borders, in quotation marks, who instead have learned to become part of both worlds whose cultural expectations are still expected they are still expected to abide by. And to me, it's interesting how these different regions have sort of like a different version of this hybridity or this theory, and part of a different type of diaspora also in a way. And the second part of the question is for you to explain how each theme relates to this decision of having this as a framework, and then what it means for this exhibition to happen at this institution and in the context of LA, and also maybe Shinpei can talk a little bit about his role as an artist participating in this show.
Thank you, Selena. Maybe I'll just start. We'll answer all those questions, hopefully. So the way the project started was about 4 years ago when the Getty released the concept of this exhibition, this project, Pacific Center Time, Los Angeles and Latin America, and arts that were coming from all these different regions. And the museum really looked at it and thought, oh, this is an interesting opportunity. How can we participate in this? And so what we really tried to focus on is broadening the definition of what constituted Latino art in the sort of the title of the proposal. And we thought about this phenomena of Japanese diaspora and how Japanese have historically gone to the United States and went to Brazil, Peru, all the different regions of Latin America to pursue better life and hopefully find labor or establish new families, and thought to ourselves, you know, all of this stuff happened like in the late 1800s, 1900s, and that surely these people who migrated to these places would have had families, and then they would have experiences, and through that process obviously develop artists as well. And so that if we could look at those people, these what we termed Japanese Latino artists, what would their work look like? I think we had our own ideas of what Japanese Latino art looked like in the United States. We have experiences of that. Myself, I was actually born in St. Vincent's, which is right here in Midtown, but I lived in East LA growing up. And so I always considered myself Japanese Latino because I grew up surrounded mostly by Latino kids playing all the time and learned the culture. And you know, I was always called Chino when I was there, even though I was Japanese. So again, this early influence of definition and sort of identity, and you know how different people see identity was something that was very important for me. So when the Getty did accept this project, we brought people like Shinpei to the museum along with other scholars and curators from these different regions to talk about this idea. And then much like the national partnership programs that the museum does, where we go to different communities like Oregon, Kona, Hawaii, New York, and we work with communities, the museum really tries to serve as a tool to help individuals, to empower communities to tell stories. And I think we tried to follow a similar philosophy here. I didn't curate each region. I had curators from each region do a lot of the groundwork. After we had a discussion on what we were looking for, we had collaboratively built a survey that we would then send to all these different curators, who would then send them to the artists in their regions that they felt did Japanese Latino art. And then when we brought them all back, we, as a team, vetted all of the artists. And it was interesting because from the process, we were able to start to define some of these issues that I think Selena's talking about, this idea of borderlands. In many of our discussions, it came up quite often. I think the first time it really came up was with George Sanchez, who's a scholar from USC. And he is from America, so he obviously has a definite perception of what Borderlands talks about. But he also added the word Transpacific to that word, so then it became an even longer word. But I think it really, from an artist perspective, it put a visual on an idea that was very intriguing. So when we talk about border, a lot of times from the American perspective, I think border has a very definitive meaning. it means that line between Mexico and the United States. And that's from an American perspective. I think working with the curators, they had very strong opinions against using the term borderlands because of that American perspective. And so there was a lot of discussion about this, this idea of using the title as Transpacific Borderlands, and even in its treatment, this idea of looking at putting borderlands upside down so its definition is no longer like just this, looking at borderlands differently by flipping it in such a visual way. And I think in the end, I don't know if everybody was 100% behind it, but I think the pluses we were seeing with this idea of looking at this word differently was something we wanted to provide or instill in our visitors to also look at this in a different way. Was that the first question? Yeah. What was it? Just a synopsis of the second one? Second one was?
The role of the exhibition happening in this institution and within LA.
Okay, not the breaking up of the homeland and
all the things, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, and then obviously when we selected 3 artists from each region because each curator, and myself, I was the one that wanted Shinpei in the show, and for Shinpei it was really interesting because even he's from Tijuana, which is Mexico, but like Selena mentioned, it's a very trans-border state or trans-border location. You're going back and forth. There's really no line there. You're just existing in this area. But on this side, there are Americans who think like Americans. You're on this side, not so much. And so it is a different experience. And so I really knew that from the very beginning, when we brought Shinpei on board, we knew that he is the poster child of the exhibition, literally and figuratively, because of that experience that he brought different baggage, which was really good and I felt was vital for the interpretation of the show. But as we started to put all these artists together, I mean, obviously the first thought is, oh yeah, we'll divide them by country. But obviously that would not work because it would become too much about their countries, which we didn't want to do. We did write paragraphs about each one that sort of defined sort of the history of it. But really what emerged from looking at all the artists in total was this idea of themes. So Homelands is the first area which talks about influences from Japan or from family, something more personal.
Idea of homeland.
Yeah, not a literal translation. You didn't have to have a Japanese flag to say, your homeland. And then the second section was mestizaje, which also emerged from a lot of the writing. This idea of mixed race, which is a strong influence in a lot of people's work. Especially, I think, a lot of that came from Miho Hagino, who was a curator from Mexico. And I think Shinpei was telling me about Jason Chang, who talks a lot about how in Mexico, well, for one, there's not a huge critical mass of Japanese Mexican communities. Japanese Mexicans are more spread out a little bit. And so there's this feeling of mestizaje, of really connecting with indigenous cultures in Mexico. And it stems from sort of the national movement in the early 1900s to make everybody in the country Mexican and not, to take the indigenous people in the farms and stuff and say, you need to be Mexican. And so it's interesting that the artists, so when you look at the Mexican artists, Japanese, Latino, Mexican artists in the show, I like to ask visitors, like, how is this Japanese American or Japanese Mexican? And people are looking at it and going, it's not as evident. It's interesting. It really reflects how they've immersed themselves into Mexican culture or the issues of Mexican people. Upstairs, we talk more about hybridization. And, in putting the artists everywhere, it's really hard because to me, all of them are hybrids in their work. But we sort of did pick some of the ones that we felt illustrated this idea of from taking these kind of two elements, they really created this new like third meaning that sort of complemented both sides. And then the last area is called Cosmopolitanism, and it's this ideal of when Japanese first came, they kind of worked as laborers and stuff, but they slowly moved to the city and started to open businesses, and from there people became even more like immersed in urban life, and their work sort of reflects this idea of like a larger perspective of the whole city in the cosmopolitan area. And then the last one was
Well, I want to make a little parenthesis, because Shinpei and I were talking earlier today about how the different countries, because countries have their own national identity, certainly the way that they see this hybridization or this like Japanese hyphen is very different from what happens here in the United States. The way that here everything is, you're Mexican, American, and it's a hyphen, and it is not really both, you're either or. And in different countries, for example, in Mexico, I don't want to say that there's no tensions and politics involved, because there's racism everywhere, but the way that people are incorporate or participate in society is very different than here. And this I say this to bring up the point of problematizing the word Latino, like the Japanese Latinos in Brazil, Japanese Latinos in Mexico, because I feel like it's a U.S. construct, because when you are in Mexico, you don't consider yourself Latino, you're Mexican or nothing, or whatever. Or in Brazil, you are Brazilian. And the concept of Latino is U.S. based. So it's problematizing that sort of idea of the Japanese Latino within each country. I think it's definitely a U.S. vision or point of view inserted.
definitely
That was very clear. And the first time we met at this, you had like a artist from from Peru and Mexico and from LA, and then we had just a small conference and panel just discussed, and I just felt there's this big disagreement over these issues, and one being the ones that are in United States of America had having Japanese blood and that being Japanese here. There's so much struggle and so much kind of desire to win this category back and to find this identity, and that was very apparent. Whereas the Japanese people in Mexico hated the United States. They just hate this. This is this imperial, huge power, and Brazilians. There was a big hatred, I felt. So as being in Tijuana for a long time, I know the both sides, and I know the back way into that, because and then I'm glad that it's not just a border as a line. It's like a border. You made it a little bit more spacious. Borderland makes it it's like a gutter. There's literally the gutter is it is the gutter. But there's always, you can go both sides, and I know the both sides. So I felt that my role in this particular small context of this exhibition and the artists involved, I felt that my role was to be a interpreter a little bit of the both sides, because first it was very clashing, I felt, and I'm a little bit disappointed that that clash wasn't too obvious in the show, and it looked like everything was nice and friendly. And I think, of course, the people were friendly and it was cool to meet, but I think that clash was definitely there, and then because, particularly the Japanese population in this country had a very different experience. And of course, this is very much related to what you have in your second floor with this exhibition about the relocation camps and so on, whereas, in Brazil and Mexico, the Japanese people have had, they call me Chino. Also, no, but it's a different kind of,
Well, because they have different histories. In places like Brazil or Peru, even, cuisine is completely fusion. and it has influence just because that speaks to how back in history the relationship goes, which is very different than here in the United States.
And I will just add that in the definition thing was really important, and I think it did have a lot of discussion. So one of the first panels you'll see in the exhibition is a definition for each country and how they each wanted to be identified. So I know for Brazil it was Nipo-Brazilian. I think for Peru they used the word Nikkei in their title, and for America it's Japanese Americans. So I mean, again, but we try to put that thing right up front just so that people can know that that discussion did take place, as far as like how would you identify, so that we can put that as a precursor to looking at the work.
Well, you said it was you said it was not the Borderlands, no? You had some critical take on that.
Yeah, well, going back to this idea of the border being a geographical location, a geographical line in a map, and how I just feel like being from the border, and I know that Shinpei shared this experience is very different because I will, give my example as being from the border versus the LA experience. That here you are expected to be either or. You cannot be both. And growing up in the border, you don't question that you are both at the same time, or you sort of switch, if you're in the United States or if you are in Tijuana, and there's no, there's political tensions, because of United States, of the system, but not really in the ways that people identify themselves in that. And so to me it was interesting to see this term of borderlands, and I agree, or I see what you were trying to open with the term, and following that sort of term, or the theory from Antalua, for example. But to me, the most interesting aspect of it is the hybridization of the place, or the imaginary place in a way, and how in the different countries, I was mentioning like countries as case studies. There's no border with Japan. It's not like Brazil is border with Japan. It's not a physical border. It's more a concept of identity that is very different depending on the history of each region. So it's interesting to problematize the terms, and it was I did see the panel where you explained the labels, but also putting the labels also brings up more questions, and I know that Shinpei mentioned right now that he would have liked to see more of that tension in the exhibition space. I mean, I feel like people have different perspectives, and also the curators had a very specific intention on how to contextualize. But I feel like contextualization is very important, especially in shows that have to do with identity, and particularly as part of this initiative of Pacific Standard Time, LA, there has been criticism of certain exhibitions that did not bring enough context into their walls, that they just showed the artwork, and there was not sufficient label information or didactic information. I feel like this is not the case with this exhibition, fortunately. But how much is too little, or I don't think there's like too much, never too much information, but this problem of contextualizing and presenting this information to a very specific public in LA, which, as we mentioned, has a very different perspective of what it means to be have a hyphenated identity.
Which leads to your second question about doing this exhibition here in LA at this time. The third question. And I think that to me was something that was critically to be talked about, because one thing that to me, and then what you talked about, the context of one thing that, because I traveled to different Latin America countries, and I meet different Japanese second generation, third generation, first generation. But what I find interesting about them is that they just, when they're in the community or where they live, they become like this octopus, and they get their feet there and they get their hands there, and they just, just are very good at bringing these things together, and they really just they go into this context, find the assets and find good things and bring them together and making something, or food, or productions, or whatever. So I think that's the I don't want to say strength of but one of the uniqueness of this Japanese people going to these different places, they go in really deep into the context, and then just connect things, So that's why, of course, explaining micro context of Peru, and within Lima there's different barrios, and micro contexts are very difficult to, you can never almost explain, Even within Lima there's different sect of Japanese communities, and there's both those that believe in that, those that believe in this, and those that belong to this association, those that belong to this association. So it's a complex, I think, task, of course. And even within LA, I think there's a little Osaka down in the west side, and a little Tokyo here, and there's the one that came before the war, the one came after the war, but the one's in the camp, that was not in the camp. It never ends, of course. So I think it's a big task you have in front of you, but I think as an institution, to do this at this time in LA, at this place, I think there's an important task, important thing that I believed.
It's like a ghost there.
Yeah, ghost.
Ghost Magnet Roach Motel. Just trying to get my train of thought. But I do appreciate all of your comments. I do feel like that's what a lot of our meetings were when we were working with the curators and the artists, is that there are so many different perspectives. It is such a large thing to take on as any institution. But that was sort of one of my roles, was to always try to rein it back in and try to understand what was our role in this whole process. And I think it is being presented in America. I think, working with Claudia and even with Selena and Heather, there was always this talk about, can it go to Brazil? Can it go to Peru? Can it go to these? And you can just imagine the price tag would be monumental. And we only use 3 artists from each country, so obviously we couldn't represent every single perspective, because there would just be too many different perspectives. So I always go back to the mission of the museum, which is to create a better understanding of America's ethnic and cultural diversity by sharing the Japanese-American experience. Obviously, that's an American context, so we would have to kind of broaden it and just talk about, can we create a better understanding of the diversity of all of these regions by sharing a perspective of a Japanese-American experience, or Japanese Latino. We use the word Japanese Latino because, again, there were so many different things. So in the beginning, we say, we're going to use the word Japanese Latino, so we can all kind of reference it, but it is problematic, I agree. And I think the Getty had a lot of conversations about the use of the word Latino versus, we don't use the H word, but specific for each region. So yeah, no, it's a difficult thing. But so with that concept, this idea of what I really did enjoy about the entire process was how, knowing that it was going to be in America, we really did kind of look at some of the experiences of local people who might see this, and really, I understand the idea of conflict and sort of tension too, which I do see that existing in works, but not between works as much. This idea that, there are these people who came from a country, and it's interesting to see how many of the things that they brought with them or were passed down to them generationally, and the new stuff that came with them in the new locations they came, all sort of manifest into these expressions of art that are very similar, so that when I look at Patsy Higuchi's work, who's from Peru, I go like, man, she could just been one of my friends in East LA, because her work is so local, but it's not. It's from Peru, and almost with every artist, you kind of have that experience. So then, when our visitors come, what I'm hoping they come away with is that idea, like, it's not a binary discussion of just Japanese and Latino. It's really this hybridization, like Selena's talking about. For hopefully there's one work that everyone has a work in the show that they really resonate with, because that's the sort of experience that they connect with. And that's why I think that work is in our museum right now, because really I think the role of our museum is to bring people together whenever possible, of all different backgrounds, to sort of understand that we are all in this game together. And the only way for us to move forward is if we can appreciate all of our similarities and helping us to understand our differences much better.
Do you think, because we were talking also earlier about how a museum is a space for debate and conversation, and I know that through your education programs and programming, you, and this talk is also included in that, you open up discussion, but also how do you feel like that discussion is put forth by the exhibition itself, or that you present the art and then you want to open up different channels for conversation? Like, should it be, or is it incorporated into the exhibition, or is that like part B of the curatorial framework?
I would say that would be part of the curatorial framework, working with the different areas of a museum, whether it's education or public programs or development. I think there's a lot of different people who, in an institution like this, would have input on sort of what you present and how you present it. So, but without question, I think museums can push that envelope, and I think it's always situational. And I think this one was really a big challenge for the museum, I think, because in the sense that the subject matter, it's interesting because there were still a lot of people who questioned, like, oh, what are we doing in Japanese? What is that? Why are we doing a show like that, kind of thing? But I've been pleasantly surprised by just normal people coming in going like, I have a friend who, my cousin's like this, or has experiences over here, or comes from there. And just to see that light bulb and how people really do appreciate the fact that a museum did all of that. But then again, your point is, did we miss an opportunity by not pushing it? So, I mean, I think, there's always what ifs and stuff. I think these programs like this can help to do that, though. So.
Well, I don't think you're missing an opportunity, but more because we are living right now in this moment. It's very politicized in terms of identity, and also the museums, especially conversations that started as early as last year with works that were controversial. For example, the Whitney Biennial, the painting on Emmett Till, and then the Sam Durant piece that was censored and removed. And also, what is the role of the institution? How much to push the envelope, but also how much of a safe space it is to have these conversations. And then I don't know if you, Shinpei, want to add anything, but we have a video to show you that is part of the Ghost Magnet Roach Hotel. And if you would like to add anything before we go to the clip.
Yeah, this is first of all, and to pre-contextualize that, I don't believe in institutions so much. I mean, because I myself run an institution in San Diego, much smaller scale, but for 17 years, and you see that as an institution itself is of course like organic things, but I think institutions to be used. So I'm just even this type of talk, I don't take credit for it, but I demanded that we have this type of dialogue, and it's also the artist's responsibility, because I don't want to wait for curators to do everything, because they're gonna have, you have another 20 other artists, So I felt that it was also my responsibility as an artist to work with the youth in a good way, use institutions do things, you know, because there was only some things that, I mean, artists, I don't have institutions, so I'm on my own, so there's good and bad, but I don't, you can, you know, there's things that I don't have to think about funders and all these different strings. So one of the projects that I pitched to Clement was to do Ghost Magnet Roach Motel, which is this noise punk foment project that I've been doing. It was 2 American musicians and 2 Mexican Tijuanensis artists and myself, and we've been doing it for about 10 years. And then I had warned them it's called Ghost Magnet Roach Motel, and then I had sent this video and so on, but it didn't become so clear that one of the member of my group, American musician actually, was to paint himself black. So that became clear in a few days before, and people were like, "Are you gonna do the black face?" So there is a big concern, and of course knowing the situations about the art and so on. So I was, you know, I was quite surprised that it was going to be happening, and then I was also not surprised that these issues was raised.
It was a few months before.
A few months before. But no, it was by a few months before. But anyway, so there's different issues, but we ended up not doing it. Instead, I think that I demanded to have a talk, which I think maybe is the point of that whole thing. You know, we've done this all over Mexico, and we had no problems. But of course, this is a different context, and this is the United States of America, 2017, where people are killing each other. So I want to show the 18. Sorry. But it was 2017. I think things have changed from that September, because I remember after that there was Las Vegas shootings, and I mean that was before all that. So I think it was different. I mean, things have changed very quickly in the last 6 months. You know, if you think about it, when you started to show it now. But I wanted to show maybe 10 minutes of my movie called Ghost Magnet Roach Motel. It's about this, and then maybe just talk a little bit more about it, so that. Yeah, so can you play that? It's 10 minutes, and it's about this guy, Tony, it's all my band members who's going through different transformation. It's one of the members doing that, so. If you're interested, it's in a bookstore called Ghost Magnet Roach Motel. But I just wanted to show that as a you know, and it's these kind of, well, for me, I've learned art production in Tijuana, and this borderland is I mean, this was a dark side of this, of course, because of this existential search. But it's not just dark or bright, but it's this is where a lot of existential search happens there, and many people end up. Of course, you're from there, but some people that come from, like myself, get there for these search. This is what I found at this borderland. So I just wanted to share that. And I've been making, we did this in South by Southwest and some of the big festivals in Mexico and so on. And I wanted to, my role as a director of this collective is to create a safe space for my musicians, because they're very sensitive, very, very talented, very sensitive, and not necessarily a professional artist in a way that they go around and promote themselves. So I've always tried to make a safe space, which has to do with making interesting structures, and some of them weren't not possible because of the budgetary reasons, different being outside during the day and so on. So I was, and then, you know, the whole thing, it was, you know, as you can see in the front of the catalog and all this, I paint myself white and put the radiation suit, no? So it goes two together. It worked always with this white face painted and with this guy black face painted. So of course I understand the institutional concern of somebody popping photos and calling it racist and what it would bring about. But I was also very shocked when he told me, "Why can you paint in, white, and I can't?" So that was a very shocking for me. It's just a paint, at the end of the day. So, and I understand the ramification, but I was sad. I felt that as an artist or as a director of the collective, I couldn't make a safe space, and it was very disappointing for me. And I felt bad. I couldn't do that for my musician. So I mean that's what it is. But we're talking about it, and I think this is an important place because prior to this, Japanese National American Museum was showing the executive order, actual original prints of the executive order of the Japanese, which is I think related to the Trump's Muslim ban. And I felt that it was a timing was becoming right, and the Japanese American had certain authentic voice to talk about some issues that's difficult for others to talk about, and the so I felt that I thought this could have happened. Of course, you never know, but I felt the timing was right for this ripe for it, But so this is, but I'm glad that you guys gave me a space to talk about it and at least explain the intention and the so on.
Yeah, I think that it's like a two-sided sort of question, because we always ask about the intention of the artist, and it was evident from the video, and if you see the rest of the film, that it's beyond or a little separate from race conversations. It's more about like a sort of existential crisis moment, and but certainly. So on one side you have what is the intention of the artist, but also we were talking about responsibility, not only of the artist and also the institution, responsibility of the artist to understand the context, not only of the institution, but also of this moment in time where certain conversations are very sensitive, but at the same time, knowing how to open up the space for dialogue, because the fact that they're sensitive topics doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. So I feel like, this is a very nice opportunity to speak about these things, and also in this institution, and like you said, because it has a history. Japanese Americans have a history with these issues too. So yeah.
Yeah, and then apart from me, I mean, I of course I want to hear, of course, and then Clement was helpful, of course. He's an artist. He knows all these complications, and then I understand the institutional thing. So whether we did it or not is not the important issues, but how we talk about it, and if the Japanese American Museum or this place is a safe space for these people that feels marginalized, because Tony has an intention. He does it. I mean, later in the film, he comes out and he does this blackface because he feels there are many people that are like that are black-faced. And I live close to him, and shit happens to him. You go downward. I mean, his daughter was in mental hospital for 15 years now, and I mean, shit just goes down and down and down. And this boy his son was just driving this Jaguar. He thought he was passing the money, and they found this drug in his car. It's a cycle, and you just keep going down, and you realize you live close to him. And you realize, this is messed up, and so I felt it was my role to give that space to that, at least, And I'm just a person, but he told me, like, look at the upstairs. He saw the upstairs, and just like, I mean, this is too critical, but you guys are doing the same thing, So that's a very harsh way of saying it, but I think you need to look at the context. This just happened 7 years ago with same executive order. One day they said it was like this. I think it wasn't so much different. We had same feelings, and it wasn't so much different back then in 1942, right? And then people all of a sudden, like, you had to go next March, by February 10th, moving day. by, you had a few months after the Pearl Harbor, you guys have to go, pack up and go. I mean, it's a crazy thing, So, I just felt that this was, I think that these are important questions that needs to be brought up, I think. And I do hope that, of course, there has been, as much as you can, but more safer environment for these things to happen. What do you think?
I appreciate all of these thoughts. I mean, I think Shinpei is a brilliant artist, and that's why we included him in the show. We know that being transborder, he does push the envelope. And I think working with Claudia and Liz, we were looking at ways to try and include this somehow. We were talking with him about, can we do half? Can we do it, just different ways of expressing that, because we agree that the videos, when we saw it, it's beautiful. And we think it's not just cinematically beautiful, it's just content-wise. It is what we would hope to include. And one of the questions as a curator or programmer that we always ask ourselves is similar, is like, if not here, where? Who would do this stuff? And we do feel like the museum is supposed to be a safe place for this. But at the same time, the lingering question was always, like the Yu Darvish thing where the guy said the word Cheeto on TV. If it catches fire, if it's a fire starter, would it do something? Who are our partners in this? And we think about, oh no, there's 70 institutions, that have this logo PST hashtag PSTLALA, and what it became really challenging. I mean, I think we even asked Shinpei if they could both paint their face white, kind of thing, but it would lose the sentiment, and so ultimately the executive team had to just request that it wasn't, that one portion wasn't included. And I do appreciate that Tony and Shinpei and they really felt it was important, but they were willing to work with us for the institution, kind of like. And I think it could have been something that could have been very controversial at the beginning of the Getty opening, which kind of made us hold our breath, like, oh my goodness, what would, I mean, it might be good press, but it might be bad press too. But again, it is, as an artist, Shinpei mentioned this, and the museum has had this issue many, many times, where we've had disclaimers. We said, be careful when you go in this room, because we try not to withhold information or censor things from anybody, because again, I think that is not that EO 9066 is an exact reference, but the whole idea of being a safe space to talk is always important. So I'm glad at least we're talking about it here.
And this has to do with the Japanese nature. If you're in Japan, everybody self-censors. It's a huge culture of self-censorship. It's always, they're gonna think it's gonna be bad, so I wouldn't do it. So that's what Japanese people excel in this. They're very good at reading what, But here is, you have in LA, you had lots going on, so it's, you can't keep thinking about it. So I felt that these are also things that somebody needs to speak out and so on.
Well, and curiously enough, I'm not here today, speaking on behalf of the Getty. I'm more speaking as a curator, or from my experience, also informed by PST. But it's very interesting that you bring up this issue of, being sort of cautious about in which way the conversation was going to move forward, because the whole initiative, of course, started 4 or 5 years prior, but it came in such a timely moment that then all the conversation that was supposed to be about the field of Latin American art history or Latino art, then it turned into this other thing that was about identity and what it meant to be Latino or Latin American in the United States. So it's sort of the whole conversation shifted at the same time because of the political moment. So just
And that's for you as a bigger scheme of PST, you know. And I think I run an organization, so I also think that this is within your organization. I think there's different understanding and different visions. For example, the media arts team had used this particular clip for one of the videos explaining my film, no? my work, and that was okay until these things got brought up and somebody called it out, and then it had to get taken down. So, you know, within the organization, I think there's different visions and so on. But, you know, is anybody from the board of director here? But I think that at the board, I mean, you know, if these kind of things, if you want to change the organization, you know, sometimes you need people like me. You can't do that, you know, but I can do it because, you know, I'm not politically ties here. So, and I think if this type of thing, I mean, eventually, I think that you need to start, you know, somehow get to the board level, and somehow it needs to, you know, evolve the board thinking, and the top level thinking needs to start to change. And I hope this will get there.
well, with this, we're gonna open up to questions from the public, and Elizabeth has a microphone.
So I might be a little bit confused. Understanding the history of blackface, and also, is it a film or a documentary? I couldn't tell. I don't know if it was fiction or true, because you gave some factual information as well. And so it seems like your intention was not to have a character or the person do blackface, but I kind of saw it as just like a personal ritualistic moment where, like, he feels so dark inside. He just is like, I just feel so dark and I want to see myself as I feel. So I didn't know, like, what if your intention was to do blackface or not to do it. So I guess I'm a little, like, I don't know if there's a little more direction you can give me.
I think his intention is not to do blackface, but to, well, as you said, you know, and as you can see in the film, but it can be considered easily as a blackface, because
if you see it without context, it has the, you know, it gets interpreted in different ways. So without context, there was the danger of it being misinterpreted.
In an Instagram post. It was for a performance that occurred on the front plaza, and during the performance, he would paint his face in blackface. But again, I think there, you know, again, we were really trying to find a way to do it so that it wouldn't only be construed as blackface.
I guess
Yeah.
when you say blackface, maybe if you give it another term, because if you say blackface, that means a very certain thing. So if you just say he wanted to paint his face black, well, I think that would give it, like, the context maybe that you needed to have. Or
Right.
I haven't been through all the drama, so I understand, but yeah.
It's yeah, I only say that because that's sort of what it would have been construed as in an Instagram post. Yeah. But he was painting. Yeah, we could change the name of it.
Black.
Hashtag painted his face black.
Hi, I just have to say, I'm really appreciate that you had this conversation today. I feel like it was very important. And you tackled a lot of tough questions, but you did it with such civility and grace. And I feel like we need a lot more of that in this day and age, because we live in a time when everyone is just so on edge and everyone is prone to very extreme reactions like, oh my God, this could offend someone, let's shut the whole thing down. But no, it's like it can be problematic and we can just talk about it. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that. And second, just a question out of curiosity, watching the 10-minute clip, I was just wondering, what were they doing in China? I'm pretty sure that was China, right?
yeah. I mean, in the movie, it's a half documentary, half, you know, I edited a lot actually, but it's supposedly he's going to the morgue to look for his son, but he's on his kind of a trip, you know. So he just jumps to this Taoist temple in Beijing. But I was there with him, and the whole we did a show with this another artist that she knows. They had a project called TJ in China in 2012, and there was right by the Ai Weiwei village. So I was there doing exhibition, and I brought him to do a couple Ghost Magna Roach Motel noise punk performance happening, and then he did a solo show called One Man's Silent Approach to Shouting. And that whole chapter is actually called that name, One Man's Silent Approach to Shouting. So, you know, that's the that's the whole story behind it. Yeah. And then I do think that I'm happy that this conversation can take place. And I think one thing that this museum need to do is really connect the second floor and the first floor. You know, the second this big historical heavy historical exhibition up there about the relocation camp and the history of it. That is left alone, I think, and it's not contextualized with, for example, this exhibition. No? And that is, I think, is a very important thing to engage contemporary work with these historical things, you know, because historical things upstairs is, of course, it's heavy with so much pain and memory, but it also is not accessible. I don't feel I can access it, you know. So that, I think, is maybe, if I can say, maybe next move for it. I don't know if Getty's gonna fund it. PSD3, you know.
We wish they would. I agree completely. The common ground is something that we have been trying to renovate for. It'll be 20 years next year, so there is a date on that. And we do want it to be much more. We've done exhibitions that have sort of explored different ways of presenting diverse stories. I think Transpacific Borderlands is one of them. We've done X-Lab. We did an exhibition called Fighting for Democracy, which traced the lives of 7 different people, only one of them being Japanese American, before, during, and after World War II. So I think we've been experimenting. It's just really hard to convert a permanent exhibition or a semi-permanent exhibition like Common Ground.
I would like you to link with the Arab Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, as part of a way, because in this context of today, with the viciousness against any immigrant populations and all their the complexities within each society is a joy and not something to be threatened by. But I would like to see collaborations with the African American Museum, the Chinese one, the one in Dearborn, et cetera, and maybe bring them all together as an onslaught against this government.
The revolution has just been started. I agree. And one of our next exhibitions actually will be What We Carried. It's a traveling exhibition from the Arab American National Museum. And we'll be sort of juxtaposing that with the executive order, the idea that only what we carried, what Japanese carried, relates to that exhibition. And we also did work with them on numerous times already. And just historically, Claudia Sobral, who's our project director for this show, was the one that actually helped us do Finding Family Stories in 1992. It was post-riot LA. And we did work with Watts Towers, Plaza de la Raza, Self-Help Graphics, Chinese American Museum, Korean American Museum. Thank you. And a whole precisely to do what you're talking about, really to create linkages between institutions that think alike, so that we can create a community that can then stand up to larger institutions. And at the same time, the Getty was doing the multicultural internship program that, when they ran that program, they didn't just say, we're going to do this program. They actually brought in people from all of those organizations as well. And I think it illustrated a commitment to having those voices at the table.
So I want to thank the
It would help because look at Boyle Heights, the attack on the galleries and the artists without recognizing the power of the artists to revitalize, and they're not a gentrifying force. housing, which is another link to the issues here in Los Angeles.
That's a whole nother exhibition. I mean, Little Tokyo is suffering from the same type of problems, issues. So the community is rallying, much like the Boyle Heights community is rallying. Yeah, and how far do you go? That's, that's up to each organization to determine.
So I want to thank the panel for having this discussion, because I think it was really important to talk about, the performance that was going to happen and the blackface. And I think it was the museum's concern that, taken out of context, that, even with an Instagram photo, that there would be controversy around it. So I really appreciate having this discussion. But also around that same time was, as I think Clement referenced, was the Yuri Gurriel incident in baseball during the World Series. But it also brought up the question about kind of the idea of race and how it's perceived differently in different cultures. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of blackface in different cultures and different cultural contexts, as well as the use of the word Chino, because I know that it is pretty widely accepted in different cultures, but for others, they may see that as offensive.
Right, who are you asking?
Anybody?
Well, I mean, as I say, I guess the term, I mean, it's just this American context, United States context, the term is so, word have so much weight here, no? So if you say blackface, of course it's different than painting face black. And in these categories, it's just a word, and in a word-based, category is so important. And when, as if almost the category, things are not described in this terminology, it almost doesn't exist, This is, I think, the problem with this United States culture. It's like, there's no wonder about these things that you can't explain. Whereas in Mexico, I think it still allows for these things that is not describable in terminology. And Chino, I mean, yeah, they still call me Chino after some years, but I don't care, because it's like a joke, So I'm worried that these kind of PC-ness is gonna come down. I mean, you see it somewhere. I mean, in some part of Brazil, I mean, big cities, Mexico cities now, they're talking about racismo, Brazil racismo, because they call race R as racismo. So I saw that it's like this PC-ness is very dangerous, and it's spreading like virus to all over the world,
Well, especially because race relations, and speaking of Mexico, they're very different than in the United States. And then now the sort of PC, or the way that we're speaking about race in the United States, is seeping through other countries, which, I mean, I think it's important to have knowledge and, not speak from ignorance. And but at the same time, I feel like the dynamics are very different. And I just wanted to mention my brother, who looks exactly like me. We look like twins, and we're 10 years apart. People call him Chino, and we're Mexican. So it's, it's a term of endearment in a way, but it's also like a sort of bundling of everything together. I mean, it's not quite PC, but at the same time, it's not offensive. And it's hard to explain in the context of the US, just because race relations are so different.
Yeah, I would just add, I think it is completely different. The history of whiteness in America has a long history of Jim Crow and stuff like that. So when slavery was ended here, we had another 100 years of legal slavery in many ways. Whereas in other countries, when slavery was ended, it was ended. And I do think that in Latin America, there is more color, I guess, in their people. But in here, there's an implied sort of white culture that people can opt into, like for a while they didn't even track Latinos in, right? Well, I mean, a Latino could say, oh, I'm white, and they would fit in. So it was something that people wanted to elevate themselves to, by acting a certain way or joining certain clubs or certain political party.
That's not why you put me in the whiteface in the cover.
No, that was Buto.
I mean,
but again,
that is an interesting
it's just
thing.
an illustration of how complex, the differences between what America is and the history versus Latin American countries. I think there's a more better feel for diversity because of their roots.
And also like the just the mere fact that nationality is treated as an ethnicity, like when you fill out the box and it's like, are you Mexican, Hispanic, the H word, Latino, it's like, well, that's not an ethnicity, but I have to check a box, you know, like why have those different definitions of that are race related to race when they're really not. It's like a national identity or a place of origin.
And then also I think this minority. I don't know if this is true with the Chicano or Mexican American community, but at least in Asian American community, you go to the Asian American film festivals, and the guy that gets, the hero there is the guy that was recognized by the white world. He was in Star Trek. He did the big movies. And he was the Asian guy, and that still is the formula here. There is this very interest and the desire to be part of, recognized by the dominant, and in this case, white culture. And then they become the spokesperson for the community. So whether that's good or bad, I mean, I understand. Look at my parents. They try. When we lived in Germany as an immigrant, they try so hard to fit in and so hard to speak the language. It's so hard to be part of it and recognized as a contributing, as a not an immigrant that doesn't know anything.
But I don't think it's a matter of like having the seal of approval. It's more like being part of representing. I am also part of the American life. I'm also an American. And also so to be sort of, like you said, a spokesperson, and so others can see themselves in us in a way, or, when someone has a public face.
It depends on where you look at it from, yeah. And not to romanticize Mexico or Latin America with this race, there is a huge class societies, and if you're Moreno, it's very, very less likely for you to be museum director. I've never met anyone.
That depends, no.
But I think
Cuauhtémoc Medina is
Okay.
pretty Moreno. He's a
Bueno,
museum
pero
director.
it's just muy fuerte. The color is also very ingrained, and that's what I think it's also here. It's mixed with this, like the class. Also, the
It's
class is
class,
getting
yeah.
mixed so big time. Here, like Tony's. The musicians I work with from different class.
We're not. I think like we know that in Latin America, like there's the anti-Chinismo and this ideal of like using them as sort of a scapegoat when trying to nationalize different aspects. So no one's guilt-free. Yeah. So there's just a long history.
Yeah, I think this discussion of cross-cultural context is really interesting. I grew up in Hawaii, and when I was little, we freely used the term Oriental to refer to each other. It's a majority Asian Pacific Islander population over there, so I guess you could think of it as a safe space. We used it amongst ourselves, and it was basically a colloquialism, and no one was offended by it. But then when I moved to the mainland, it became Asian American, and now, obviously, after having learned more about histories of exoticization, I am offended by the term Oriental, but it's definitely within this the context of the cultural context of American white cultural hegemony.
Do you want to go?
Okay, thank you. This question is for Shinpei. In your travels through Latin America, what country do you think is the best for an artist with a Japanese background? And how does that compare to the United States?
I didn't go. The travel I made through Latin America was more searching for the survivors of the atomic bomb. So I didn't quite do these. On the way I met some Japanese artists, But I think it's wherever that works. I think people have different that part. I think like I said, some people get to Tijuana for some reason. I got there. For me, Tijuana was one area that was one place that really helped me find my voice, but for other people, I think it's different,
Well, one artist from Peru said that the political situation there hampers the production of his work. And I just wonder if there's a relationship between that.
There is very little, as far as the artistic production goes in Tijuana, there's not so much censorship, Yeah. But I think that to be able to work on these very things that we are talking about on the other side of the border is safe. So.
But also, I'm not sure who you're referring to, but artistic production can mean different things. Like, I don't think it's related to his identity, his or her identity. It might be related to the type of art that he or she is producing. Like, if it's really political, then, it might be censored. Or I think it's content-wise, not because of who the person is.
So depending on the type of production.
So I want to thank you very much, because it's like herding cats to try to get these ideas to put together to create some sort of a form, and I really appreciate the chaos, really. So there's two things that I think maybe intersect, and I would ask you. First of all, is the belief in the notion of race, and anything that might, any discussion around that. And then, Shinpei, you described physically and in a very dancing form, what is a frontera? What is a border? And then you used the word seepage. And to me, you described seepage, but you also used the word seep in describing what happens to people as sort of like changelings. And my own work is very I'm interested in that. First of all, I have Hapa kids. So that becomes sort of a personal issue, and I wonder how they see the world. We never talk about it. But the seepage, remember how you were talking about an octopus? To me, that's a perfect description of how we all come into a culture. And I see it as a very universal of a person discovering who they are. Do you want to talk a little bit about that seepage and the concept of race? Does it exist?
Seepage, like
Seepage,
leaking.
right.
Some things are leaking
Yeah.
from the gutter,
Yeah.
gutter overflowing. Yeah, I mean,
Draining the swamp.
draining the swamp. Yeah.
I'm very sorry to have
Yeah.
repeated that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's a kind of a seepage, as in, that's kind of I mean, the reason why I'm starting to I was intentional to try to do some things in LA, because Tijuana didn't have many infrastructures for art place to show, and I did a lot of all the small galleries and private ones and the cafe and the state run and the federal run, and so I'm kind of leaking to Mexico City, or trying to do some things more in Los Angeles. So that's one kind of leakage. My octopus leak, is getting longer.
Also out of the boxes of the category, you said something about categorization.
Yeah.
Those boxes.
Yeah. Category. Yeah. It's, to me, it's almost I don't. Yeah.
I think that the part of being hybrid, I mean, I don't consider myself hybrid, but I come from a place that's very hybrid. So I feel that I see that as a sort of privilege in a way, or because also your identity because of the United States, it changes depending on the context. And I myself don't have a problem with it. Like, for example, I am Mexican, but here in the United States, I am, I'm also an American. I'm both, because I am an American citizen. So to me, I don't like to use a hyphen because I don't think I'm Mexican American. I'm Mexican and American because I grew up in Mexico and I was born here in the United States. And also, I am a Latina because here I'm considered Latina because I grew up in a Latin American country. I am Latin American because I grew up in a Latin American country. You know, I have that sort of like multi identity thing that I don't have a problem with it, and it's not embodying or appropriating identities. It's more like I have that sort of flexibility. I am also considered Chicana just because, you know, I grew up in the border, even though the border experience is completely different from the Chicano experience, and I do align with the politics of the Chicano experience, but I didn't grow up in this context. So for me, I came into it later, you know, very recently in the past 10, 15 years, perhaps, of my life, just living here in LA. So
I would love to see you not use animals to describe human behavior. Let's respect the animals. When think of the imagery, animals, the actual octopus, and you get this image of something malevolent, or the vulture, the snakes, and weasel, and all of these imagery with these animals who have a right to be. That is who they are, however they are within their biological being.
Well, I think it was just a metaphor for a lot of
The
hands.
metaphor is metaphor.
Yeah.
Animals are being so vilified by our behavior.
but it's not a negative thing.
Yeah, I think.
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
I
it's
didn't
not
mean
a
against you, but it's just I see this all the time, and no.
But this category is an interesting. I mean, I don't know if you like it, but I came to like the category. You know,
Which category?
all of it, and then it gets addictive, and I use the category. You know, so when I'm here, I'm Japanese Latino. Okay, it sounds cool. And then when I'm in Mexico, you know, they don't like that. You know, I have this art dealer that I was telling her, and he wants to sell this work to this guy, and they want a like exotic piece. So he told me, don't speak Spanish. You're a Japanese contemporary artist from Japan. Okay. And I'll just keep switching. And this is, you know, I'm addicted to these different categories, and I use it. It's just a category.
Well, but my point was that the categories come from here. Because when I lived and grew up in Mexico, I was Mexican. You know, I mean, I was Latin American philosophically because we are part of this imaginary place all bundled together. But also I think it's very, to me, finding out that I grew up in the border or in the border region, but coming to LA and understanding how the United States perceives even the entirety of the Mexican geography as like a border region to the south. Like everything, you know, Mexico is the border, which to me is a very interesting concept. Coming from here, from the United States, which no.
But
Well, and in terms of race, I mean, I think that's a more complex conversation.
yeah, race is definitely. We should have like 2 months to talk about this. But I think Selena's idea, when the symbol of sort of these categories, it's interesting because the first one is just white. It doesn't describe anything. It's something, again, it's almost something people can aspire to. If they choose to be, if they can pass for it, they can rise to that. But everyone else is categorized as being different.
Well, it's like the opposite of color theory. White is here is like the absence of otherness.
Right. And so that's why the race issue is, it's already in that category, I think, creating us and them. Yeah. So right there's a bit of a challenge. I think the museum would hope that one day there would be no, you know, you're American or not American. I don't, you know, it wouldn't be about race, but unfortunately the history of this country has a lot of issues about race. So.
In terms of the, because Shinpei, what you said, that the tension was not on the walls, you know, maybe not the tension, but like the discussions, the complexity, sort of all the different angles, that was not on the wall or visible. And I'm keep thinking about what would that look like for the visitor, and how would the visitor enter this and have 20 minutes to see this exhibit, or 30 minutes, and how do you get that across, that tension? And I think, like, based on what we see, is that people don't tend to read text panels. You know, people's attention span is very short, right? And we have a very big audience of school groups that come to the museum daily. So the way we were able to address this, I don't like to call it tension. I think it's really complexity, because people tend to see identity as flat. Really, it's just much easier to polarize things, and that's the time. I mean, we're living in a polarized world. So when the school students come to the museum, even though those things are not on the wall, we have an opportunity to ask these kids questions about identity and about culture and diversity, and to really get them to think. And if they come out of here thinking, you know, that especially like with the experience of the, you know, the Nikkei, the Japanese Brazilian, the Japanese, the Nippo Brazilian, the Japanese American, there is so much about, you know, what you can assume about a person by actually what they look like. I mean, we make that, all of us do that. We're so quick to make assumptions and to think that we know. You know, I look at you and I'm gonna assume so many things, and really I know nothing about you. So that was sort of what this exhibition allowed us to do. You know, when Eduardo Tokeshi, who did the piece, The Flag, I don't know, you know, those of you who saw the exhibit might remember that, the one, you know, of the Peruvian flag with this object that looks like someone strapped in there. And he talks about his identity as Japanese Peruvian, and heard him talk about the idea that when people look at him, they make so many assumptions, and he feels Peruvian, but he's not allowed by his own people to really, by his own people, meaning Peruvians, to be a Peruvian, because they look at him and they see him as Japanese first. And this is someone who doesn't even speak Japanese, and who really feels Peru is his home. So anyway, there was a lot of conversations about that with the students, so it was really an opportunity to sort of unpack identity. And what was so interesting to me too is that a lot of the groups were, I mean, you know, students whose parents or grandparents were immigrants, and who were not born in this country themselves. But, you know, when you ask them about the experience of a diaspora, I mean, those kids, a lot of these kids don't even know, okay, this word diaspora, I mean, I'm used to that word because I am diaspora, but a lot of students have not even learned what that means, but not only the meaning of the word, but what it means and all the baggage that you bring with you. And you know, and to feel proud of that, and to how do you negotiate that every day? And it's pretty much what your work and what the work of the other artists allowed us to speak about in a very safe context, because there is really no right or wrong when it comes to identity and to redefine that. So I want, yeah, that was important to bring up.
So I think with this we are gonna wrap up, because there's a book signing event after this, and you have about an hour to see the exhibition. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Seeing the exhibition, if you haven't seen it, is important, because when the doors close at 5 or 4:30. Yeah. I mean, because to me, this, thanks to the Getty, this show is so unique. That ability for us to bring art from Peru, Brazil, and Mexico City with a like-minded kind of approach is very rare. Unfortunately, I don't anticipate seeing it again soon because of the cost to ship these things. So yeah, that's all I.
Yeah, and now that its unpacking is done, I think it's time to use what's unpacked. And then I think it's time to, I mean, the time is really, I think, ripe. I think it's just, a moment is really coming soon. The first generation that experienced the camps are dying in the next 5-10 years. The moment of this country is also shifting. So I think timing is ripe for this, you guys to get loud. So I hope that's going to happen.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.